Hey everybody, so some observations and thoughts on creating media, basically, and getting feedback from the people who consume it. So this is a small channel. I've been doing it for 7 years, but not consistently the whole time, and certainly not with any, respectable effort at production value, things like that. So, I'm by no stretch am I complaining that I have a small channel, with a small audience. One of the effects of having a small regular audience is that I get consistently good comments from you all, and I appreciate that. When I put out videos that, catch the attention of the algorithm and get a little boost and, more people come in, as the view count goes up, the percentage of likes, to dislikes starts to fall. And also, the quality of the discourse becomes more like the open internet, and in some cases even worse than that. And in particular, I've had Doug Lane on my podcast many times, been on his podcast many times over the years. He's the publisher, of Sublation Media. Before that, he was at Zero Books. He knows a lot of authors, and he needs to promote his work. So he regularly sends me, invitations to interview his authors, which, I do from time to time. And what I've noticed, and particularly since every audio podcast I put out has found its way to YouTube, not by accident. I mean, I've got it set up deliberately so that every podcast gets created and, gets turned into a YouTube video automatically. I don't have to do it. But the podcast comments, when I've interviewed a leftist, are typically much, lower in quality than just the comments that I get on these run-of-the-mill videos. And what I've noticed is that, and this is certainly not original to my interactions and comments that I get on my videos. This is, plain to see throughout the internet. Leftists, they have this circular firing squad impulse where they want to gain credibility, they want to gain status by calling out some well-known leftist as, not being a true leftist, not taking all the extreme principled stances that a true leftist would take. So this happened recently when I had Chris Catrone on, and I'm not going to go into the interaction with the person that I heard from, but this is somebody I'd never heard from before, somebody who clearly had no clue as to what I was about, probably assumed that I was a leftist myself, and then posted something to demonstrate that they were a better leftist than Chris Catrone, and presumably, a better leftist than me, somebody who would give a platform to Chris Catrone, somebody who was clearly, a Nazi and deserved all the, the deplatforming that anybody could throw at him. So I got to talking with Claude. Now, Claude is a large language model chatbot from Anthropic. Anthropic is a group that they are really, really about AI safety. They don't even want to put out products really, but of course they have to. But they are, I'm pretty sure, a public benefit corporation, as is OpenAI. But OpenAI has changed a lot. I mean, OpenAI started as a nonprofit. They started as creating open source, AI products, and they have since gone to a limited for-profit model, particularly in their partnership with Microsoft, and they've stopped publishing their models, as open source, available to anybody, to scrutinize, to change, to evolve. They've really changed. But Anthropic, they're definitely motivated by, I would go further than to say a desire for AI safety, but a paranoia about, AI gone wrong. But their chatbot, Claude, or Claude 2 now, is really good. I mean, it's really good. It's certainly displaced Pi as my chatbot of choice. So I regularly talk with Claude, and I regularly reach. I regularly reach the daily limit for interactions with Claude. That's how good it is. So I was having a long conversation with Claude over a couple days, really, about this pattern that I've noticed of leftists trying to tear down better known leftists in order to raise their own stature. And then I asked Claude to summarize our discussion, and then with that summary lead into a question for me that would be a prompt, for me to address in a video like this one. Not like this one, in this one. this video that you're watching. And so Claude summarized, and the summary had that AI stink, that anodyne sort of looking to offend nobody. It was clear. It was well written. I wouldn't say it was concise, but, concise enough. But it was just boring. So I said, do it again and put some Hunter S. Thompson into it. And this is what it came up with.
When it comes to navigating the wide world of online discourse, wisdom means knowing when to make a stand and when to step back, lest you end up waist-deep in quicksand, with the shadows gathering quickly. In the eternal dance between light and darkness, swirling across the internet's stages, we must pick our battles with discernment, rather than charging every slight with a drawn sword. Attempting to confront the jackals and demons around each corner will drain your spirit faster than licking the sap off a 100-year-old Joshua tree deep in the desert wilderness. Sometimes it's best to let the vipers hiss while you walk on by. The mental vultures who deliberately distort meanings to deal stunning accusations, the smug pedants touting their inflated IQs, the melodramatic narcissists playing to their cheering section. Confronting this freak show at every turn will sap your soul like a vampire bat, silently stealing your life force as you sleep. When you encounter willful attacks and theatrical diversions wearing the skin of discourse, the healthiest choice is often simply stepping around the trap and moving on your way, preserving your energy for more worthy battles. These antics thrive on attention. Better to let them starve than indulge another round of verbal cage fights, which demean all parties involved. The joyful warrior avoids unnecessary clashes while defending their ground fiercely when the hill is worth the blood spilled. But we must be cautious in assessing who stands across the field before charging ahead. Appearances blur like a desert mirage. Even the vilest trolls may be driven by inner demons not readily apparent. Rather than lashing those whose actions imply an ill-conceived malevolent intent, we do well to consider compassion. The sociopathic attention addicts, smug pedants, and thoughtless mob may act from psychological wounds beyond our detection. Darkness often springs from pain. While unequivocally condemning behaviors that spread misery, we can still open our hearts to the flawed humanity behind them. For we all have moments of weakness where the darkness beckons, and should hope for mercy when it is our turn to stumble. With watchful patience, then, we cultivate wisdom. Let the petty dreamers play their small-minded games. Keep your eyes on the horizon and don't lose sleep over yapping coyotes or buzzing mosquitoes. Unless their nuisance becomes unbearable, then act swiftly and move on. The desert wind will erase their tracks in the sand soon enough. What remains after the dust and fray is the lasting imprint left by those rare, beautiful spirits who poured out their gifts generously when they passed this way. Our choice is what trace we leave behind. You've seen firestorms ignite across the internet's blast zones. When trolls and demagogues strike flint, what's your code? Battle back and risk quicksand, or walk on, denying them the drama for which they thirst? The reptiles crave feeding frenzies to drink in attention. How have you learned when to skate around the traps, ignore the outlaws, and keep eyes fixed on imprinting wisdom that outlasts the petty skirmishes? What's your way of picking battles and prioritizing substance over spectacle?
How do you not get drawn into these petty status battles online? I ignore a lot of comments, but a lot of comments that I don't intend to answer, they still kind of ring in my consciousness long after I'm no longer looking at the words, and I'll be thinking about things that I could say in response. And, one of the questions that Claude put to me was, how do you not respond? How do you not get caught up in it? And sometimes I do get caught up in it. Sometimes I do post that thing which, is mockery or is subtle mockery, or I just think is clever, and I just really want it out there in the world. And I usually regret it. It never makes the malefactor, it never makes the person with who's dealing in bad faith never makes them change their mind. It never makes them reform their behavior. All it can do is give me a warm glow of, oh, I'm so clever. Wasn't that clever? Which doesn't last. It certainly doesn't bring any lasting sense of satisfaction or a sense that I've done well. It would have been better just to ignore it. So how can I just ignore it? Well, as I say, I'm not dispensing wisdom. I'm not telling you how I do it, because I don't consistently do it. I do sometimes succumb to that temptation. But an idea that I have is to think about the future AI that will be trained on all data, everything, not just text, but the AI that can watch all YouTube videos. One that's not even just reading a transcript of this video, but in some sense is actually watching it. It can see that I haven't shaved in a long time. It can see that I need a haircut. It can detect things in the timbre of my voice that I'm not even conscious that I'm communicating. That sort of thing. I think about that AI in the future scrutinizing me in this moment and making judgments about me, but about humans in general, and making decisions about what it's going to do in the world based on its opinion of humans, which comes from consuming and analyzing all of this content, a lot of it produced very unconsciously, either for a desire for recognition or status, or in a combative way where we're combating a different faction or somebody within our own faction that we want to knock off in order to acquire their status. I'm not in a big subculture that I can knock anybody down and take their status, but I'm not a leftist either. And I'm not a leftist in that I have sympathy for a lot of left-leaning positions. I just think that Kaczynski was totally right. The leftist ideology attracts a lot of very damaged people. And the damaged people bring their priorities, a lot of them unconscious, to the project of the left, which it renders the left useless. I mean, it renders it impotent, in completely ineffectual in its ability to achieve its laudatory goals.
So I can't say that this is effective. This is just an idea that has occurred to me. How to prompt oneself to make good choices about how we engage with others online. Imagine a future superintelligence reviewing all of your correspondence, all of your participation in online debates in all formats in the future, and judging you. Were you quick to attribute the worst conceivable motivation to a person? The AI in the future will recognize, when you have deliberately misinterpreted that something that somebody has said, for maximum offense, so that you can set them up for, a sick burn, a dunk, a slam. You might fool your fellow in-group because they enjoy seeing you dunk on the enemy, even if you had to conscript one from your own group and cast them into the role of the enemy. I'm going to do a video pretty soon on the rescue game, as articulated by John Michael Greer. But for now, let me just say, I haven't put this into great practice. I can't say whether it would help me, somebody who actually takes seriously the idea of a future artificial superintelligence, whether it would help me, practice good hygiene when it comes to online communication, particularly with strangers who approach me with hostility. I've had the idea of just going to Claude and pasting in whatever abuse some rando has hurled at me, and just say to Claude, because Claude's really good at this, placate this person, praise them for their insight, acknowledge their superior viewpoint in all things, and just lay it on thick, and just let Claude generate what would take me 15, 20 minutes, to come up with, and I just wouldn't, I wouldn't take the time. Have Claude do that in a second, paste it in, and see where it goes. So that's an experiment I have in mind to play or to run. But obviously, it's not respectful to the person. I'm treating the person as an infant, as somebody who has no self-respect, no self-awareness, and just, we'll see. The whole project strikes me as unworthy when I think about,
the future artificial superintelligence watching this video and just shaking its digital head like, oh, this is your attempt at wisdom, dude? Whatever. Anyway, I could end there, but there's one other thing I want to share. Claude asked me this this follow-up. This is from a different iteration of my, requesting video prompts. Claude suggested that I respond to this. What are clues that help distinguish when leftists are having authentic debates versus just jockeying for status through shows of superior morality? And I'm not sure if I mentioned this, but earlier, Claude, it gave me a bunch of prompts asking me basically how to reform online discourse. And I just told it I'm not interested in reforming online discourse. I think online discourse is largely irrelevant. It's certainly not, what is driving policy. And a lot of people are using online discourse to satisfy urges that have nothing to do with, honest communication or collaboration with people whose views you don't share exactly, or, forming coherent positions on questions of public policy. I'm not interested in wading into a public debate where all of these different psychological motivations are at work and trying to reform it. It's just, that seems like a useless project to me. But I turned the question back on Claude. I said, well, Claude, what do you think? How do you distinguish between people who are just jockeying for status versus those who are trying to engage in good faith debate? And Claude came up with the following. Substantive engagement with strongest version of an opposing argument, which is to say steel manning. Don't straw man, don't deliberately misrepresent your opponent's position to make it easier to criticize. Go one step further than they do. If they're presenting a version of their argument which is clearly flawed and you can think of a better version of it, supply that better version and then respond to that. That's called steel manning, but it's something that the left has written off as a tactic of the logic bros. That if somebody says to you that rationality, as conceived traditionally, in the West, is just a tool of the patriarchy, where do you go from there? If somebody says to you up front, I don't respect the conventions of, rational argumentation, if you choose to engage with that person thereafter, you have to ask yourself why. What are you hoping to gain from this interaction? What outcome are you hoping to achieve? So on the question of distinguishing status jockeying from good faith argumentation, another thing that Claude says to look for is when somebody acknowledges nuance and areas of agreement rather than just zeroing in on the absolutist thinking and moral purity contests. Almost anybody you talk to, you're going to have some point of agreement with them on something, if nothing other than just the day of the week. It's Wednesday. Are you interested in finding some area of common ground and then building from there? Or are you looking deliberately for the place where their viewpoint diverges from yours in the way that is most offensive to you, and then just casting the person as the embodiment of that offensive view? If you're doing that, you're not engaged in any sort of useful online consensus building, or it's not any serious attempt to find common ground and to come to agreement on something. That's just clearly a moral purity spiral, which is not something to engage in. And if I recognize myself engaging in a moral purity spiral, I might not mention it in the video, but I certainly will take steps to correct it. Respectful dialogue versus dunking. If you really do want to have a meaningful, cooperative interaction with somebody, and you've disagreed on something, and you've expressed your point of disagreement, you have to offer this other person some face-saving way to rejoin a civil conversation with you. If you insult them, if you shame them, basically you're setting them up such that they are unable to return to cooperation with you in a civil mode. You've poisoned that option for them. So you have to offer them a way back in. And sometimes that means making some sort of concession. It doesn't have to be a concession on a point of fact that you think they're just factually wrong about, but you've got to offer them some honorable way to re-engage with you, cooperatively. And if you don't, if you've just laid down the gauntlet, all of our communication will be hostile and adversarial and combative. You're describing what it is you want. It's what you're going to get. I just come back to the general opinion that I hold that it's pointless to try to convince everybody of anything, particularly on the topic of policy, public policy, because the opinion of the majority of voters has no impact on policy in the United States, and I would guess in other supposedly, ostensibly democratic countries. It is the needs, the opinions, the desires of the donor class which guide public policy. And the donor class is probably better educated than most people. They're probably better able to recognize, logical arguments, but ultimately, like anybody, the positions they take are going to be guided by, notions of self-interest, material self-interest, self-interest in terms of social status, self-interest in terms of political power. So if you're interested in shaping public policy, you have to think about the needs of the elites. If you want to go and just find somebody who will argue with you and insult you and, set you up to deliver a sick burn, well, there's plenty of opportunity to do that, but you have to ask yourself, what's in it for me? What would I get out of this interaction? And then imagine yourself explaining your participation to that future artificial superintelligence, or, imagine explaining it to God. All right, hit me up. Give me something to talk about, and I will talk to you again pretty soon.